back to another episode of Living Out the Gospel, all about how do we live out our faith, not just on a Sunday morning, but all throughout the week and what we do in our lives. And I'm very privileged and honored to have a good friend of mine, Ron, here. Also, again, a member of CFC. Everybody's been a member of CFC thus far, has been a guest. So you're my next unfortunate guest. But thank you for being here.
I'm glad to
Appreciate
be here.
it. And I want to start with a fun question each time.
Sure.
And because we have the big election coming up on Tuesday going on, if you could be president for just one day, what is one thing? If you could only do one thing in the day, what would that be?
Well, just based upon my life and where my emphasis has been, it would be to eradicate poverty. That would be it. Just ensuring that everybody has an opportunity to live the type of life that they could live.
Okay. Very nice. That's a much deeper answer than some people could give. Like, oh, I'd fly in the jet, or I'd do this, or I'd do that, or I'd give a... Yeah, so, yeah.
Okay.
That's very cool. Very cool. Well, if you could just tell listeners and viewers what you do for a living and how did the Lord lead you to that?
Okay. So it's not as straightforward as it's going to be. So I'll just try to walk through as easily and as quickly as I can. I'm currently, my title is the Executive Director for Developmental and Disability Services. And I work with a specific state aid agency, the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities. So basically, in a nutshell, what I do is I'm responsible for all policy and funding decisions for all those who receive support from the state when it comes to developmental disabilities.
Okay.
So that's what I do.
Gotcha. And then how did you get to that?
Okay. So I was born in Jamaica. If you cannot tell by my accent, that's where it's from.
What? I had no idea. I thought you're from like Chicago or New York or someplace.
You know, no, I'm actually from Philly. But I'll come back and I'll tell you that in a minute because I really am too.
Yeah.
So I was born in Jamaica and my mom was living here at the time. So I had an opportunity to either stay there when I graduated from college or I could come here. So as someone who was in the Caribbean, it's just big in terms of hotel management. So that's the career pathway I was looking at. And it so happens that after I graduated, we have one big university across the Caribbean, different campuses on various islands. And in Jamaica, it was the University of the West Indies. And they had a school for nurses, so they had a nursing cafeteria. So my first job out of college was to manage this nursing cafeteria. And I lived, I believe, probably an hour away. And so I'd be getting up at like 5:30 in the morning to get to the restaurant early to open up because I was managing the place. And then at midnight, when I'm closing up and saying goodbye to everybody and then heading on home, I did that probably for close to a year. And then when I had the opportunity to come here, I'm thinking, nah, I'm not going to do that anymore. So I'm going to find something else to do. So when I came here, I didn't know exactly what direction I wanted to go in until probably a couple of weeks. And I thought, I love finance. I love business. That's what I should pursue. So I decided that that's what I was going to do. But like everything else, let me back up and say I got saved at 12, where I asked the Lord Jesus Christ to forgive me and enter my life. That happened at 12. So at 18, I knew what my life was for. It was committed to Christ. So when I make decisions, I always seek to try and find what God has in store for me. So anyway, when I came here, I spent some time trying to figure that out also. And my mom worked at this state institution in Pennsylvania. That's where I migrated to when I came here first. And I went to visit her a few times. And she was literally working in a building where people with developmental disabilities were. And when I say people with developmental disabilities, I'm talking about individuals. Their IQ is below 70, and they have some issues with some adaptive skills. So that's the population. And I can go on and on about them. They're fantastic, wonderful people. Of course, they do have some challenges. There's some that's more severe than others. And there's some people now with autism that would fall into that sphere. Not everybody with autism would, because there are folks with autism that are very high functioning, and they don't have many limits in daily living skills, that kind of thing. But those who do have would fall into the group that I'm talking about. Anyway, I'd go visit my mom just to check in how she's doing, and people there started talking to me around, why don't you come and work here? And I'm thinking, I know nothing about working with folks with developmental disabilities, not a clue. So I'm not sure that's for me. And I think probably over a couple of weeks, they kept talking to me, and something within me said, you know what? Don't close that door. Be open to it. So I said, okay, let me at least interview. Well, I interviewed and I got the job instantly. I think I may have started that very day. So I'm thinking, okay. And of course, the institution at the time was a place that was in Pennsylvania, and Temple University was involved in the direction and leadership. So it was, for me, a great learning ground. I learned a lot about people with developmental disabilities and all the various challenges that they have, and how you can scientifically help them adjust and adapt. So that was the kind of atmosphere it was. So back then, there were these large institutions where people were just housed, and not much really good development opportunities for them. But this was totally different. So anyway, that's how I started my career. And I can say now, 40-something years later, I'm still in it. And the path that it led me was this. Why I stayed? Okay, that's important to know. There was a time when I still felt like, you know what? I really need to go back to school and major in business and finance. And I loved what was happening with Wall Street and money management and all of that. That I felt was my passion. But when I started, the people that I worked with, and I'm talking of folks with developmental disabilities, they accepted me as I am. Total acceptance. You can understand me now when I speak. I'm telling you, back in the 1980s, not many people could, except the folks with developmental disabilities. I would go to the bank, and the tellers would say, what did you say? One time. What did you say? 2 times. What did you say? 3 times. Eventually, I'd start writing it down. I'm here to withdraw X amount. You know, and you can imagine me, a note, handing over to a teller.
Oh.
But anyway, people with developmental disabilities never asked me what I said. They got me from the first get-go, right out the gate. And it was just something that was so affirming for me. When you talk about being welcomed and belonging and all that stuff and community, I felt like that was my community. But as I worked and I got promoted, and I worked and I got promoted, because it was just something naturally that came to me that, you know, this is what I was meant to be. I still had some doubts. And then a couple of years later, a very dear friend of mine said to me, when I talk about my desire, what I'm doing now, my desire to go explore something else, because back then I wasn't getting paid a lot of money. I really wasn't. And so I'm thinking, you know, how can I take care of my family and do this? I need to look at other options. But God had something else in store. My friend said to me, Ron, don't you realize what you're doing? That's your ministry. That's what God meant for you. Listen, y'all, the light bulbs went off. And that's when I realized, you know what? She's exactly correct. This is what God intended for me. And so that's what I've done and I'm doing now. And as I watch my career just take off, remember, I didn't have a degree in psychology. I didn't have a degree in social work. None of this. I started out exploring hotel management. And I eventually came here and I went to a 3-year college in Jamaica. So I had to finish my degree here. So I went to Temple University, of course, and got a degree in business administration with a major in HR. So go figure. And I did that part-time while working where I was. And then after a number of years, we determined, and it was like God just opened the door. And as a family, we determined that we needed to relocate to Georgia. And there was a specific job that I looked at that I wanted to explore. And that was a position with the States. All these years, I was working either for the institution or a provider. And at some point, I said, you know what? I do want to be on the other side to make some of these policy decisions so I could do a better job of doing it, because I've experienced on the other side, the provider part of it, the issues, the concerns. So I wanted to change that. And God just opened the door where in 2005, there's a position here that was with the state that folks who lived in institutions, like I started my career in, that they needed to have an opportunity to live like you and I in the community and to enjoy all the resources of the community, which was typically the way back then. People with developmental disabilities were just put away in an institution. They were just sent away, and they weren't a part of society anymore. So in Pennsylvania, I started doing that work. I started transitioning people from institutions back to the community. And that was something that I absolutely loved doing. And Georgia, at the time, there was a lawsuit that mandated that Georgia needed to do the same. And so I said, you know what, this is what I really want to do from the state position. So I came here specifically for that. But God opened the door, because when my wife and I came to visit one weekend, and just had an interview in Douglasville, didn't hear back from the state. Months I'd replied to the state, didn't hear anything. And the HR friend of mine told me, while you're here, you should go visit the state office. And I asked him about it. The job that I interviewed for in Douglasville, I was offered that job before I left. So, okay, so we're praying about this. Is this the right thing or not? And so my friend said, just walk into the state office. Now, listen, y'all, that's not done. You just don't walk into a state office and say, listen, I applied for a job and I'm trying to figure out what's going on with it. I've heard nothing. And that's what I did. And within minutes, the admin person went and got the director, and she came out and met me and said, come on back. And an interview panel was set up, and I was interviewed. And again, before I left, she was taking me around the office, introducing me to all these people, and said, by the time you get back to Pennsylvania, there will be a job offer in the mail. Only God.
Yeah. That's amazing.
So then that happened. And so then now we had to sell our home in Pennsylvania, and then we had to come here and do all of that. But God just worked it all out. It was seamless. But that's how I see God in my life. The steps I take, I really don't want to take them by myself. I can't even imagine what that would be like. Well, I can. I've done that in some situations and found out the hard way. I don't want to do that. So I try to align myself with what God has in store for me. And then I started working with the state. Honestly, my intention was the state had a great pension, better salary than I was working before. And so I determined, okay, this is it. I'll stick with this job until retirement. God had other things in store. Before I knew it, I was getting promoted again, promoted, until the commissioner reached out to me and said, would you like to be the director for the entire state? And I said, okay, let me go talk to my wife. The history of of this position is this: every single director for the past 20 something years only lasted 3 years. So I said to my wife, guess what? It's a great opportunity, but be prepared. It's like a 3 year commitment because nobody gets beyond 3 years for the past 20 something years. And look at me, going on 8 years later. That's how God works. And I just say this also: there's one of me in every state. That's how God works. There's one person in my position in every state making these critical and important decisions. And again, I'm not worried about my longevity. I'm not worried about, because God's there with me and He has created opportunity that I can make a difference across the state of Georgia. So I'm really just so thankful.
You're just an instrument.
I'm just an instrument.
Yeah, and He's working through you. And praise God, you are where you are. Because as you were saying, the story of how you got to that, one of the questions I normally ask is, how are you able to be a witness for Him in the workplace? But actually, I think I would alter that question a bit, and I would focus on how your worldview, really, having a biblical worldview, like how that informs how you view people with disabilities. Because as you said in the past, and of course the farther back you go in history, the worse it is. Being people like, okay, well, we don't want them around, let's put them in an institution, and yet you're doing the opposite, saying like, no, we want them to be treated like members of society. So if you can speak to that.
Oh, absolutely. And I speak to the first part that you mentioned too. So think about it. This is how God works, right? I come here. I'm now in this country. I don't know much about anything, right? I'm starting all over, basically. And the people who accepted me were people with developmental disability. Right out the chute. Of course, I got connected with the church and all that stuff. But when it comes to a meaningful moment in my professional career, that was it. So it framed everything for me. Now it's my opportunity to do all I can within my power to better their lives. And that's what I've tried to do all these years. In fact, I've spoken to different groups, and what I've said to them is, I see myself as their legacy because they invested in me just by accepting and loving me, that it's my responsibility to show every person who has a developmental disability an opportunity to better their lives. So that's the foundation of what I do now and the work I do. Repeat the first part of the question. You don't typically ask, but typically ask, but you weren't asking me.
Oh yeah. So the first thing I mentioned is the usual question has something along the lines of, how are you able to be a witness for Christ in the workplace? Awesome. How does that inform?
Awesome. So my values and where my values come from are all biblical. What I've learned is from the Bible, what God has shown me. And I'll give you an example. When I started in my position, the state was literally seen as the enemy. So my first job was to say to people, we're not the enemy. We're actually here to help people, right? And so that was the biggest charge I had. And that was the perception of providers who provided the direct care for people. That was the perception of families who were looking to the state for help and assistance. And that was the view of individuals who needed the service. So you can imagine me stepping into that. And because God was the one who led me along my professional path, as He has done in the rest of my life, I did not come in thinking I'm bigger than anybody else. I never looked at my title. I never cared about any of that. All I cared about was, how can I make a difference? So my approach with my faith is that, listen, y'all, we're here to work together. God clearly, through Jesus, clearly stated to us that we should love God first and love our neighbors, right? So my thing was, how can we work together to achieve the goals that we all want to see? And that's everybody with a developmental disability living a fulfilled life wherever they want to live it in the community. So that was what made a difference to me. You can go back now and you can talk to families, you can talk to providers, you can talk to other stakeholders, and they'll tell you that if I'm leaving a legacy, that's one of the major legacies I'm leaving. The fact that I'm able to sit and listen and be responsive to people and what I've been hearing. That comes not from me. I've been called all kinds of things. I've had things said to me, but it's not about me. I cannot keep looking at me. I got to look at the strength that Christ has given me to be able to share love, to better understand what some people are experiencing, and to try to help them do something about it. So that's the faith that I live out daily. And I always need to be, no matter what situation I'm in, to be calm and to be able to listen and to respond in a loving way. That's what my faith has taught me professionally. And I've been in all kinds of groups. I've been in a group of probably, let's say, 50, 60 people where somebody got up and says, I'm a football coach. Well, no, I was a former football coach. I used to coach young men on various teams. And what I would say to my team is this: you keep the other team in front of you. And basically what that means is you keep your enemy in front of you. And so he turned around, looked at me and said, yep, you got to keep your enemies right in front of you. And he was pointing directly to me. I've been in situations like those. And then I've thought, it's not about me. I know what I'm trying to do and to achieve. So I need to make sure that my response is a loving one.
That's wonderful. Well, it's that last thing you said makes your response is a loving one. Because, if someone is, attacking you or calling you different things, the immediate fleshly thing is like, oh, I need to return that. But instead, do you catch yourself and say, no, I need to stop and I need to respond? It's like, okay, how would Christ respond to that?
Absolutely. I'm human. And you can feel your blood pressure just rising, and you can feel the surge of blood in your body, and you're thinking, man, I gotta, and then you're reminded there's a small voice that says, no, you won't. So I realize who I belong to. That's the thing ultimately that brings me back. I need to remember who I belong to, and really ultimately, the state employs me. I'm working for the state, but now I'm working towards God, to God. So that's where my bigger responsibility lies.
Yeah, so, you're what is the you're not working for, you're technically an employee, but it's like you're doing everything unto Him. Yep. You're serving the Lord by doing a good job. And then how do you navigate being in the world but not of the world?
I truly believe that we are in the world. We cannot hide ourselves away and pretend that we're different from everybody else, right? We're humans. And I don't think Christ called us to that. Now, I know there's some people who believe that that's what they should do, and I'm not going to speak for them. That's them. But I truly believe that what God has called me to do is a part of the world, to live within the world, and to show them, by the grace of God, how you can live a life unto Him that really God can look and say, well done at the end of the day, right? But you still interact with all kinds of people, all walks of life, you name it. It's not my job to judge them. Mm-hmm. My job is to show them that there's a God who lives, who loves you, who loves me, and that's it. My job is not to judge anyone, nor to say to them, you evil this or you evil. That's not my job, right? My job is to just show them, if you need love, guess what? There's a God that loves you, loves me, and absolutely can transform your life in a radical way. That's how I see myself on this earth.
And then how is your faith outside of the workplace? How does that inform just your day-to-day life of like your family and your friends and you know, just community in general, of like when you go places and you just like go to a restaurant or you go to the store, like how does that play out?
So I will not sit here and say I'm one of those guys who, wherever I go, I just talk about the love of Christ. I wish I was, but I'm not like that. But what I do is, wherever I go, I show love. Whether it's at church, which I'm deeply involved in, and that's something that no matter where I've lived, I've always, since I got saved, I know the value of a church family, because there's some solace, comfort, encouragement, all of that there, because you're going to face all kinds of stuff during the week when you go around. So my job, if I go to a restaurant, I make sure I tip well. I make sure I show people favor. I make sure I'm not disrespectful in any way. And that's what's totally embedded in me, that no matter where I am, no matter what I'm doing, I recognize the value of every single person, no matter who they are, no matter what they're doing. And that's what I try to do. And we open our house up to a community group. I've always been engaged in that, in ensuring that. Right now, it's mostly folks from my church, but I do what I can in whatever way to just show love to other people.
That's wonderful. I mean, that's fantastic. And you know, this next question I normally ask is, you've kind of already touched on this really, but apart from, again, working with, again, the opposite of developmental disabilities, is there a particular cause that is really near and dear to your heart? Maybe something connected to a church, maybe something that's not connected to our church that you'd like to mention?
Yeah. And in a few years, I'll be retired. I will no longer be with the state. And what drives me more so than anything else, and I've learned this, and part of it is because of my experience through life so far. I have a passion and a heart for people who are downtrodden, who aren't able to do for themselves. I have a passion for people like that, because I once was in a position where I didn't know where my next meal was coming from. And God provided. And he did it through other people. And so I know the value of reaching out to people who are in dire situations, with some love and with some truly material help, what that can do. So as I think about what my next step and what I'll do in the future, it's going to be something along those lines, where I truly can give back, because I've been at the top and I've been at the bottom. And I know what being at the bottom is like. And if I can reach out a helping hand in the future to others, I absolutely will. So that's the other thing that God's laid on my heart. And I truly, I know, I absolutely know beyond a shadow of a doubt, he already knows what my next steps are going to be for me. He has it all lined up. He's just waiting for me to be ready to launch.
Ready to launch. He's working on you.
He's
Working on both of us. A constant work in progress.
There you go.
Like I remember I was at the Billy Graham Library years ago.
Right.
And I think it's Ruth Graham. That was his wife.
Right.
And she's laid to rest there. And I'm trying to remember exactly what the headstone says.
Right.
It says like, "Thank you for minding the dust."
Yeah. Wow.
So that was a work in progress.
Wow.
So
wow.
I really like that. It's like we're not gonna be perfect in this life, but we know that He's working in us and through us to continually shape us to be more like Him.
Absolutely.
Which we need to be.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. Let me just reflect on this for a minute. I got saved when I was 12, and this was a few months after my dad. I literally watched him pass away. He got injured during a tragic accident. Well, tragic in the sense that for a young child that was 11 and a half, it was something that was fairly startling because I observed it. The part of it that I couldn't come to grips with was nobody in my family at the time, none of my uncles, none of my grandfather, who was like the patriarch, none of my aunts, nobody knew anything about Christ. And probably a year before that, as I said, the University of the West Indies, and it may have changed somewhat now, probably, I haven't looked at it, had various campuses at various islands. In Trinidad, which is another island in the Caribbean, was the engineering school. So if you wanted to be an engineer, you would go there. And my cousin went, and within the first semester or so, within the first year, it's been so long, I'm not quite sure with the details, but within the first year of attending there, someone shared the gospel with him, and he got saved. And the first break he had, he rushed back to Jamaica to share the gospel. The first person he saw to share the gospel with was me. This is right after my dad had passed, and I'm thinking, I have 3 brothers and 1 sister, so there's 5 of us, and I had passed an exam to go to a high school in another part of the country, which was away from my family. So everybody is grieving, and here me now starting high school in another part of the country. And it so happens to be, I was staying with my aunt. So when he came back, I was there. He saw me, and he was just so excited to share the gospel. That was life transforming in a number of ways. But think about it. Young man just lost his father, now fatherless, and thinking, and I'm not living with my immediate family, now thinking, what am I going to do? And here comes Christ through my cousin. And what did he say? He's father to the fatherless. I found me a father, a heavenly one who has turned out to be, in so many ways, a earthly one too. And my cousin was able to connect me to a church before he left also. It was just so amazing how God can just turn that time in my life into something so much more powerful and meaningful. And don't get me wrong, I've had moments. I've never truly walked away from God, never done that. But I've had moments of disobedience. I really have. But I always know, always, and I can never say, oh, I don't remember. No, I know what God expects of me and God's role in my life. And so no matter what I've gone through, and I've gone through all kinds of things, the constant has always been Christ in my life. Just knowing that he's there. One of my favorite verses is from 1 Peter 5:7. Cast all your cares upon him because he cares for you. That's my life motto. No matter what I've gone through, I can always know that Christ is there for me. So that kind of sets the foundation for who I am as a person and the way I see my career and my life as just interwoven.
Beautiful. Praise the Lord for that.
Yeah, thank God.
Yeah. And then lastly, if you could say just a very short message, like 60 seconds or less, to somebody who does not know Christ, what would that be?
No matter what you're looking for on this earth, in this life, you're not going to find anything better than a life living for Christ.
And there we leave it.
Okay.
Good last word. I appreciate you, Ron. I know
Daniel,
we all at CFC
likewise.
appreciate you. So thanks for being on. All right. Well, that's it for this episode. And go live out your faith.